Yo, yo! Magandang umaga sa inyo lahat. At ngayon, siyempre, tayo'y maglalaro. Ayan, naiirinig nyo. Siyempre, bagala natin yan. Sa ano na to? Sa website. Yan. Maglalaro-laro muna tayo. Josu. Yun. Tagal ah.
Music volume 73. Play button. Yahoo game online.
Yun.
View active tables button. Play button.
At yun na nga, ang lalaroin natin ngayon. Mile by mile na lang.
1424 button. Chaos bear button. Crazy sparkle button. 5 car top left right center button. Light third button. Mile by mile button. 99 button. Mile by mile button.
Ito.
Create a new table button. Yahoo waiting for players. Zoom in. 9 max. Actions menu button. Race distance. 1000 miles button.
1,000. I-sit muna tayo.
Winning score. 5000 points button. Team mode. Individual button. Winning score. 5000 race distance. Actions menu button. Race distance. Winning score. Team mode. Individual button. Require exact finish. On button. Allow stacking attacks. Off button. Reshuffle the start pile. On button. Allow stacking attacks. Off button. Reshuffle the start pile. On button. Karma rule. Off button. Tech rating. On button. Karma reshuffle the start. Allow stacking. Require exact team mode. Winning score. Race distance. Actions menu button. Players tab. Actions menu button.
Mag-add na tayo ng boot.
Spectate. F3 button. Add bot. T button.
Yan.
Enter bot name text box. Submit button. Enter bot name text box. Clear.
Napapangalan natin sa boot. Ano na lang,
Players tab. Enter bot name text box. Capital D. Victor. Capital H. Hotel. Capital H. D. Bravo.
What?
Opera translation. TTS rate. 83. Opera translation. Default. Scrolling mode. Default. N. November. N. Mike. Submit button.
hey, excuse me, boo.
Page point to table. Action menu button. Start game button.
Start na natin.
The game begins. Browser turn.
May background pa, oh. Lang, magtutok. Dapat nakatukbak tayo, ano.
Touch block. All touches and textures on block. Please press the volume button keys at the same time to table. L volume keys. Talk back turn on. Talk back on. Touch a block. Wheel. With speech feedback and browse by touch suspended.
Yan.
Turn menu. No next heading. No next heading. 75 miles. Autocast. Button. 100 miles. 75 miles. Repairs. Check status. Button. Lose turn.
Wala tayong green light, ah.
75 miles. 100 miles. Autocast. 75 miles. Speed limit. 25 miles. Speed limit.
Ano muna.
Speed limit. Button. Yahoo play speed limit on page. Page is turn. Page play green light. Review. Accident. Yahoo turn. Autocast.
Ah,
Button.
matindi
75
pa.
miles. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Autocast. Button.
Tanggalan natin siya ng gas.
Autocast. Yahoo play gas stage.
You.
Turn. Page is hard to card. Review. 100 miles. Yahoo turn. 75 miles. Repairs. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Yahoo play accident.
Boom.
Page is turn. Page play touch roof. Page is hard to card. Review.
Na siya.
Yahoo turn. Green light. Button. 100 miles. Green light.
Tara, andar tayo.
Yahoo play green light. Page is turn. Page play Yahoo. Review. Green light.
Ay,
Yahoo turn.
gag.
Check status. Lose turn. Button. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Yahoo. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Flat tire. Stop. Safeties. None. Page. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Speed limit. Autocast. Stop. Accident. Safeties. Punch roof. Green light. Button. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. 100 miles. 75 miles. 25 miles. Button. Action menu. 25 miles. Button.
Magtatapon tayo.
25 miles. Button. Yahoo to start the card. Page is turn. Page is start the card.
Pag itatapon mo long press lang.
100 miles. 75 miles. Repairs. 100 green light. 50 miles. Check status. Button. 50 miles.
Wala pa.
50 miles. Button. Yahoo to start the card. Page is turn. Page play speed limit on Yahoo. Improve. Enter limit. Yahoo's turn. Check status. Enter limit. Button. Enter limit. Button. Yahoo plays enter limit. Page is turn. Page play gasoline. Improve. 50 miles. Yahoo's turn. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button. Check status. Button.
Ano yun?
Check status.
Our
Button.
current
Yahoo.
time
0/5000 points.
is
0 miles. Problems.
11:10.
Flat tire. Stop. Safeties. None. Page. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Speed limit. Stop. Accident. Safeties. Punch your roof. 50 miles. Green light. 50 miles. 50 miles. Button. Yahoo to start the card. Page is turn. Page to start the card. Improve. Spare tire. Yahoo turn.
Ay, naku,
Check
inuubo.
status. Button. Spare tire. Check status.
Ito,
Button.
spare tire.
Spare tire. Button. Yahoo play spare tire. Page is turn. Page play repair. Improve. Enter limit. Yahoo turn. Check status. Button. Enter limit. Button. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Yahoo. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safeties. None. Page. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Speed limit. Stop. Safeties. Punch your roof. Enter limit. Green light. Button.
Tara.
Green light. Button. Yahoo play green light. Page is turn. Page play Yahoo. Improve. Accident. Yahoo turn.
Pinlat na naman.
Accident. Button. Enter limit. Accident. Check status. Button.
Tira, ulo.
Check status. Button. Yahoo. 0/5000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Flat tire. Stop. Safe. Accident. Enter limit. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. 75 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. Action menu. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo to start the card. Page is turn. Page to start the card. Improve. Green light. Yahoo turn. 75 miles. Repairs. 100 miles. Enter limit. Accident. Green light. Check status. Green light. Button. Accident. Button. Green light. Check status. Lose turn. Check status. Green light. Button. Accident. Enter limit. 100 miles. Repairs. 75 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles.
Tarantado talaga.
75 miles.
Under na
Button.
sana yun eh.
Page turn. Page start to car. You move. 25 miles. Down turn. 100 miles. Enter limit. Accident. Green light. 25 miles. Check status. Button. 25 miles. Button.
Matagal to,
25
matagal.
miles. Button. Down to start to car. Page turn. Page play green light. You move. 75 miles. Down turn. Check status. Button. 75 miles. Green light. Button. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Down to play accident page. Page turn. Page start to car. You move. Green light. Down turn.
Gara ng accident.
75 miles. Green light. Check status. Button. Green light. 75 miles. Green light. Button. Enter limit. Button. 75 miles. Green light. Button. 75 miles.
Shoutout muna sa mga
75 miles. Button. Down to start to car.
driver ko dyan.
Page start to car. Accident. Button. Check status. Accident. Green light. Button. Green light. Enter limit. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Down to start to car. Page turn. Page start to car. You move. 75 miles. Down to turn. Accident. 75 miles. Check status. U-turn. Button. Check status. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Down to start to car. Page turn. Page play right away.
Ay, may ano na siya, hindi niya na kailangan ng
Check status. Button. Autocast. Button. Accident. Autocast. Button.
Light.
Check status. Autocast. Autocast. Button. Down to play page. Page turn. Page to start to car. You move. Gasoline. Down to turn. Check status. Gasoline. Button. Accident. Button. Green light. Enter limit. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. 100 miles. Repairs. 100 miles. Actions menu. 100 miles. Repairs. 100 miles. Enter limit. Green light. Accident. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Accident. Button. Green light. Enter limit. 100 miles. Button.
kailangan ko ng ano,
100 miles. Button.
pero
Down to start to car. Page to turn.
bomba.
Page to start to car. You move. Autocast. Down to turn. Green light. Accident. Button. Gasoline. Autocast. Check status. Button. Autocast. Gasoline. Button. Accident. Button. Green light. Enter limit. Repairs. 100 miles. Button. Actions menu. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. Enter limit. Repairs. Button. 100 miles.
Tarantad.
100 miles. Button. Down to start to car. Page to turn. Page to start to car. You move. Stop. Down to turn. Enter limit. Green light. Accident. Gasoline. Autocast. Button. Stop. Button. Check status. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. You can't play stop because down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Repairs.
Tagal to, hindi pa nakakausad.
Check status. Button. Repairs. Button. Autocast. Repairs. Repairs. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Stop. Down to turn. Check status. Stop. Button. Autocast. Button. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Stop. Down to turn. Check status. Stop. Button. Autocast. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Spare tire. Down to turn. Check status. Spare tire. Button.
Yun.
Spare tire. Button. Down to play spare tire. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. 100 miles. Down to turn. Check status. 100 miles. Autocast. Gasoline. Accident. Button. Green light. Button.
Tara.
Green light. Button. Down to play green light.
Takbo.
Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Green light. Gasoline. Autocast. 100 miles. Green light. 100 miles. Button.
Takbo!
100 miles. Button. Down to play 100 miles. And now 100 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. 200 miles. Down to turn. 200 miles. Green light. Button. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. Down to play 200 miles. And now 300 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Stop. Check status. U-turn. Button. Check status. Stop. Button. Green light. Button. Stop.
Wala nang mile.
Stop. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. 100 miles. Down to turn. Okay, not mine. Check status. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Down to play 100 miles. And now 400 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. 25 miles. Down to turn. Check status. 25 miles. Button. 25 miles. Button. Down to play 25 miles. And now 425 miles. Page to turn. Page play gasoline. You move. Speed limit. Down. Check status. Speed limit. Green light. Button. Autocast. Gasoline. Button. Gasoline. Button. You can't play gasoline because your car has gas. Autocast. Button. Speed limit. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Down to 0/5,000 points. 425 miles. Problems. None. Safeties. None. Age. 0/5,000.
Wala.
Speed limit. Green light. Button. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Green light. Speed limit.
Wala na akong ano.
Speed limit. Button. Down to start the car.
Wala nang
Page to turn.
pangtakbo.
Page play right.
Gagawin na sa kanya na lahat ng
You move. 25 miles.
Our
Down to turn.
current
Check
time
status.
is
25 miles. Green light. Autocast.
11:15.
Gasoline. Autocast. Autocast. Button. Down to play on gas. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Enter limit. 25 miles. Enter limit. Button. 25 miles. 25 miles. Button. Down to play 25 miles. And now 450 miles. Page to turn. Check status. Page to start the car. Gasoline. Enter limit. Button. Gasoline. Check status. Button. Gasoline. Enter limit. Green light. Gasoline. Accident. Enter limit. Repairs. Button. Enter limit. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. 50 miles. Green light. Button. Gasoline. Button. Green light. Enter limit. Gasoline. Button. 50 miles. Check status. Button. 50 miles. 50 miles. Button. Down to play 50 miles. And now 500 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. 50 miles. Down to turn. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Down to play 50 miles. And now 550 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Speed limit. Down to turn. Check status. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Down to start the car. Page to turn. U-turn. You move. Expert hand. Expert hand. Check status. Expert hand. Expert hand. Button. Down to play expert hand. You move. 50. Check status. 50 miles. Gasoline. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Down to play 50 miles. And now 600 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. You move. Enter limit. Down to turn. Check status. Enter limit. Button. Gasoline. Enter limit. Green light. Button. Enter limit. Gasoline. Gasoline. Button.
Hindi ko na kailangan yan.
Turn. Page to start the car. Improve. Stop. Jump to turn. Stop. Enter limit. Button. Stop. Button.
Wala na yun, hindi na yun tatalab sa kanya. Hindi ko na siya mapapahinto eh.
Page to start the car. Jump to turn. 75 miles. Button. Check status. 75 miles. Button.
Takbo tayo ng 75 miles.
Jump to play 75 miles. And now 675 miles. Page to turn. Page to start. Check status. 100 miles. Button.
100.
100 miles. Button. Jump to play 100 miles. And now 675 miles. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Jump to play 75 miles. And now 675 miles. Page to turn. Page to play 5 miles. Improve. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Enter limit. Gasoline.
Good.
Check status. Gasoline.
Napalat.
Check status. Button.
Pinlat yung ano ko.
0/5,000 points. 800 miles. Problem. Flat tire. Stop. Safety. Check. Gasoline.
Kailangan ko na nung pabomba.
Page to turn. Page to start the car. The start time shuffle back into bed. Improve. 100. Check status. 100 miles. Button. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Jump 0/5,000 points. 800 miles. Problems. Flat tire. Stop. Safety. Extra tank. 8. 0/5,000 points. 200 miles. Problems. Out of gas. Safety. Puncher rule. 100 miles. Enter limit. Enter limit. Green light. Gasoline. Enter limit. Repairs. Button. Enter limit. Gasoline. Green light. Gasoline. Button. Gasoline. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn.
Yung mga hindi na natin
Page to
kailangan.
start the car. Improve.
Tatapon na natin
Jump to
yan.
turn. Enter limit. Enter limit. 100 miles. 75 miles. Check status. Button. 75 miles. 100 miles. Enter limit. Enter limit. Green light. Enter limit. Enter limit. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. 100 miles. Button. Improve. 100 miles. Jump to turn. 75 miles. 100 miles. Button. Check status. To turn. Button. Check status. 100 miles. 75 miles. 100 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Check status. 100 miles. Button. Page to start the car. Improve. Speed limit. Jump to turn. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. 50 miles. Check status. 50 miles. Button.
Tarantad.
50 miles. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. 100 miles. Jump to turn. Check status. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. Enter limit. Green light. Button. Enter. Repairs. Button. Actions menu. Repairs. Enter limit. Green light. Button. Enter limit. Button.
Ayop talaga ako.
Enter limit. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. 200 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. 200 miles. Check status. Button. 200 miles. 100 miles.
Sayang
100
mga
miles.
to.
Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play gasoline. Improve. Repairs. Jump to turn. Repairs. Button. 200 miles. Repairs. Button. Check status. Repairs. Button.
May gasolina na siya.
Repairs. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 200 miles. Out 400 miles. Check status. 50 miles. Button. 200 miles. 50 miles.
Kusa ng 200.
50 miles. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 100 miles. And now 500 miles. Improve. Check status. Green light. 200 miles. Button. Green light. Button.
Talo na yata ako dito ah.
Green light. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn.
Bagay paunahan naman sa finish. Yung finish line nito ay 5,000.
Gasoline. Jump. Check status. Gasoline. Button.
5,000 yung ano yung
Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 75 miles. And now 650 miles. Improve. Stop.
finish line.
Check status. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. You can't play stop.
Hindi na pwede sa kanya gamitin yung
Jump to
stop.
start the car.
Hindi na siya pwede pahintuin
Page to play
kasi
75
may
miles. And now 700 miles.
shock.
Repairs. Check status. Repairs. Button.
Busit talaga.
Repairs. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 50 miles. And now 750 miles. Check status. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Jump to start the car.
Bawi.
Page to turn. Page to play 75 miles. And now 700. Check status. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 75 miles. And now 800. Check status. Gasoline. Button.
Walang kwenta yung
Gasoline. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn.
kukuha ko eh.
Page to start the car.
Battery
Green light.
level
Jump to turn. Check status. Green
95%.
light. Button. Green light. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 100 miles. And now 550 miles. Stop. Check status. Stop. Button.
Kwenta na lang tapos na.
Stop. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to play 75 miles. And now 575 miles. Check status. 75 miles. Button.
Oo.
75 miles. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. Enter limit. Check status. Enter limit. Button. Enter limit. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. Check status. 75 miles. Button. Check status. Button. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. Jump to start the car. Page to turn. Page to start the car. Improve. Spare tire. Jump to turn. Check status. Spare tire.
Yun.
Our current time is 11:20.
Start the car. Improve. Accident. Jump. Check status. Accident. 200 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. 100 miles. 200 miles. Accident. Button. Page to start the car. 200 miles. 200 wheel web. Attorney. Race complete. Calculated scores. Jump 1,500 points in race. 1,000 from distance travel. 400 from completed trip. And 100 from run safeties. Page 1,275 points in race. 175 from distance travel. And 300 from free safeties. Total scores. Jump 1,500 points. Page 1,275 points. New race begins. Improve. Stop. Jump to turn. Improve. Stop. Jump to turn. Spare tire. Button.
Bawi, bawi, bawi.
Green light. Button. 100 miles. Enter limit. Stop. Check status. To turn. Button. Who's at the table? To turn. Button. Check status. To turn. Button. Who's at the table? Button. Leave game. Button. No next default. Wheel web. Web view. 100 miles. Button. Enter. Stop. Check status. To turn. Who's at the table? Button. Leave game. Button. No next default. Who's at the table? To turn. Button. Check status. Stop. Button. Enter limit.
Wala yung ano, tingin na ng score.
Check status. Button. To turn. Check status. Check status. Button. Jump 1,500/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safety. None. Page 1,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Stop. Button. Check status.
Mas
Button.
mataas pa rin ba yung akin?
Check status. Button. Yahoo. 1,500/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safety. None. H. 1,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Button. Mental limit. 100 miles. Green light. 25 miles. Button.
Ako ata yung nakatapos.
100 miles. Green light.
Lag.
Button. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Green light. Station turn. Front. Play stop. Yahoo. Mental limit. Button. You move. Flat tire. Stop. Button. Mental limit. Button. Stop. Button. Flat tire. Button.
Gago
Flat
ka.
tire. Button. Yahoo. Play flat tire on H. Station turn. Station start the car. You move. 200
Tato
miles.
ka.
Check status. 200 miles. Stop. Button. Mental limit. 100 miles. 25 miles. Spare tire. 25 miles. Action menu. 25 miles. Spare tire. 25 miles. 100 miles. 25 miles.
Di mo ba alam ng kay
25 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car.
green
Station turn.
light?
Station start the car. You move. 75 miles. Mental limit. Stop. Button. 200 miles. 75 miles. Check status. Button. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Station play right away. Station start the car. Mental limit. Button.
Naku, may right away na naman siya.
Check status. Mental limit. 200 miles. Stop. Mental limit. 100 miles. Spare tire. 25 miles. Action menu. 25 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Mental limit. Button. Stop. Mental limit. 100 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Mental limit. Button. 25 miles. Button. Spare tire. 100 miles. Mental limit. Button. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You move. 50 miles. Yahoo. Turn. Mental limit. 50 miles. Check status. Who's turn? Who's at the table? Who's turn? Check status. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You move. 25 miles. Yahoo. Turn. Check status. Button. 25 miles. Button. 25 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You move. 25 miles. Yahoo. Turn. Spectator turn left. Check status. Button. 25 miles. Button. 25 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. You turn. Button. Station start the check status. Button. Yahoo. 1,500/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safety. None. H. 1,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Flat tire. Safety. Right away. Front of offline. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. You can't play speed limit.
Di na rin to kailangan.
Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Play spare tire. You move. Reverse. Yahoo. Turn. Check status. Reverse. Mental limit. 200 miles. Mental limit. 100 miles. Spare tire. 25 miles. Spare tire. Button. Spare tire. Button. You can't play spare tire because your tires are fine. 100 miles. Mental limit. 200 miles. Mental limit. Reverse. Check status. Who's turn? Button. Check status. Reverse. Mental limit. 200 miles. Mental limit. 100 spare tire. 25 miles. Action menu. Button. 25 miles. Button.
Makakatakbo na siya mga
Yahoo. Start the
kaibigan.
car. Station turn. Display 100 miles. And now 100 miles. No next heading. No next heading. Turn menu. Heading 2. Yahoo. Turn. You move. Zero left. Left 2. You move. Mental limit. Button. 200. Mental limit. Reverse. Spare tire. Check status. Button. Spare tire. Reverse. Button. Mental limit. Reverse. Spare tire. Button. Spare tire. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Display 100 miles. And now 200 miles. You move. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles.
Tumatakbo na siya mga kaibigan.
Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Display 75 miles. And now 200. Check status. Spare tire. Button. Check status. Button. Spare tire.
Kaya natin siya magsaya.
Spare tire. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn.
Mamaya babawi tayo.
Display 50 miles. And now 320. Check status. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Play green light. Reverse. Button. Mental limit. Button. 200. Yahoo. Turn. Mental limit. Button. 100 miles. Button. Spare tire. Button. Action menu. Clear. Tap.
200 na
Spare
yan,
tire. 100 miles. Mental limit. 200. Mental limit. Reverse. Button. Mental limit.
Takbo
Button.
tayo, takbo.
200 miles. Button. 200 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 200 miles. And now 200 miles. Station turn. Station play 50 miles. And now 400. Mental limit. Button. Mental limit. Button. Mental limit. 100 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 100 miles. And now 300 miles. Station turn. Station play 50 miles. And now 400. Spare tire. Action menu. Spare tire. Button. Mental limit. Mental limit. Reverse. Green light. Green light. 100 miles. Check status. Who's turn? Check status. Button. Check status. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 100 miles. And now 400 miles. Station turn. Station play 50 miles. And now 525 miles. Check status. 200 miles. Green light. Button. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 200 miles. And now 600 miles. Station turn. Station play 75 miles. And now 550 miles. Check status. 200 miles. Green light. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. You can't play 200 miles because it can't be played right now.
So, dalawang
Yahoo.
beses.
Start the car. Station turn. Green light. Button. Station play speed limit. Yahoo. You move. 100 miles. Green light. Green light. Green light. Reverse. Mental limit. Button. Mental limit. Mental limit. Mental limit. Button. Yahoo. Play mental limit. Station turn. Station play 75 miles. And now 675 miles. Button. Green light. 100 miles. Button. Accident. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 100 miles. Check status. Button. Station play 50 miles. And now 675 miles. Check status. Button. Green light. Button. Accident. Button. Green light. Check status. Green light. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Station turn. Reverse. Yahoo. Turn. Reverse. Button. Green light. Reverse. Check status. Who's turn? Check status. Check status. Button. Yahoo. 1,500/5,000 points. 700 miles. Problems. Hello fast. Stop. Safety. None. H. 1,275/5,000 points. 6. Reverse.
Our
Green light.
current
Green light.
time
Green light.
is
Reverse. Mental limit. Spare tire. Action clear.
11:25.
Tab. Tab. Selected. Tab. Tab. Clear. Action menu. Spare tire. Mental limit. Reverse. Green light. Green light. Green light. Button. Reverse. Button. Green light. Button. Reverse. Check status. Who's turn? Button. Check status. Reverse. Green light. Green light. Green light. Button. Green light. Button.
Nanggalan ako ng gas.
Green light. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Reverse. Button. Check status. Button. 25 miles. Check status. Button.
Walang
Check
gas.
status. Button. Yahoo. 1,500/5,000 points. 700 miles. Problems. Hello fast. Stop. Safety. None. H. 1,025 miles. 25 miles. Button. You can't play it. Yahoo. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. Reverse. Button. You move. Gasoline. Check status. Button. Gasoline. Button. Gasoline. Button. Yahoo. Play gasoline. Station turn. Station start the car. You move. Reverse. Check status. Reverse. Reverse. Green light. Green light. Green light. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Play green light. Station turn. Station play Yahoo. Mental limit. Yahoo. Turn. Green light. Button. Reverse. Mental limit. Button. Spare tire. Button.
Tarantado talaga
Yahoo. Play
ito.
spare tire. Station turn. You move. Hello fast. Yahoo. Reverse. Button. Green light. Button. Reverse. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Actions menu. Clears. Tab. Actions menu. Repairs. Button. Green light. Button. Repairs. Repairs. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Overcast. Button. Overcast. Button. Value date. Activate. Date return. Date gasoline. To group. Green light. Out. Check status. Button. To return. Check status. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Value date. Green light. Date return. To return. Button. Date date repairs. To group. Overcast. Out. To return. Button. Check status. Overcast. Button. Overcast. Button. Value date. Activate. Date return.
Pag tatakbo,
Activate. Date
no
limit.
driving is.
Date check status. Stop. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Stop. Button. Stop.
Yan.
Button. Thousands of cars. Date return.
Wala.
Date wait 75 miles. And now 800 miles. Check status. Button. Accident. Button. Check status. Accident. Button.
Hindi na ito magagamit sa kanya kasi may
Accident. Button. Thousands of cars. Date return. Date play speed limit 1000. YouTube. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles. Cancel limit. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Thousand play cancel limit. Check status. Button. Date play 100 miles. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Thousand play 75 miles. 1,175 miles. Date. Zero red. Revenue. Total scores. 2,275 points. Age. 3,275 points.
3,000 na siya. Sa mag 5,000. Kailangan maabutan natin yan mga boss.
Accident. Improve. Accident. Thousand turn. Improve. Zero red. Revenue. Improve. Accident. Thousand turn. Turn menu. Heading 2. Cancel limit. Button. Repairs. 75 miles. Actions menu. Clears. Tab. Actions menu. 75 miles. Cancel limit. 25 50 miles. Stop. Accident. Check status. Button. Return. Button. Check status. Accident. Button. Accident.
Walang
Button.
tira.
Date return. Date start the card. Improve. 100 miles. Thousand turn. Check status. Button. 100 miles. Stop. 50 miles. 25 miles. Cancel limit. Repairs. 75 miles. Repairs. Cancel limit. 25 miles. 50 miles. 25 miles. 25 miles. Button. Thousand start the card. Date return. Date play repairs. Improve. Accident. Thousand turn. Stop. Button. 100 miles. Stop. Button. 50 miles. Button. Cancel limit. Button. 50 miles. Stop. 100 miles. Button. Campaign online. 100 miles. Accident. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Date. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. 50 miles. Thousand turn. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Thousand start the card. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. Overcast. Thousand turn. Check status. Overcast. Button. Overcast. Button. Thousand date overcast. Date return.
Kita rin natin siya ng problem.
Check status. Spare tire. Button. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. 2,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safeties. None. Age. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Accident. Safeties. None. Spare tire. Button. 1. Stop. Button. 50 miles. Cancel limit. Repairs. 75 miles. Repairs. Button. Cancel limit. 50 miles. Button.
Sana sa akin naman mapunta yung
Button.
return way na yun.
Date return. Date play speed limit 1,000. Improve. 75 miles. 100 miles. Spare tire. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Cancel limit. Repairs. 75 miles. Action menu. Button.
Dalawang
Action
beses
menu.
na.
75 miles. Repairs. Cancel limit. Stop. 100 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Thousand play cancel limit. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. Driving days. 100 miles. Spare tire. 75 miles. Driving days. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. Driving days. Button. 75 miles. Spare tire. Button. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Thousand start the card. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. Overcast. Thousand turn. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Nav offline. Stop. 100 miles. Spare tire. 75 miles. Driving days. Overcast. Button. Overcast. Button. Thousand play overcast days. Date return. Date play gasoline. Improve. 50 miles. Thousand turn. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Thousand start the card. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. 50 miles. Thousand turn. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button.
Ayun nga pala sa mga subscriber natin dyan.
Date return. Date start the card.
Shoutout sa inyo.
Flag away. Thousand turn. Check status. Flag away. Button. Flag days. Button.
Ay buset ka. Ito na.
Flag away. Button. Thousand play flag away. Check status. Repairs. Flag days. 75 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Stop. Button.
Tatakbo na tayo.
100 miles. Button. Thousand play 100 miles. And now 100 miles. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. Speed limit. Stop. 75 miles. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. 75 miles. Flag days. Repairs. Button. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Return. Button. Check status. Date start the card. Repairs. Button. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Thousand play 75 miles. And now 175 miles. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. 50 miles. Thousand turn. Spare tire. Flag days. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Actions menu. Clears. Tab. Actions menu. 75 miles. Stop. Button. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. Thousand play 75 miles. And now 100 miles. Date return. Date play overcast 1,000. Improve. 100 miles. Spare tire. Button. Flag days. Repairs. Stop. Button. 50 miles. Button. 100 miles. 50 miles. 100 miles. Check status.
Tinanggalan tayo ng
100 miles. 50 miles. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Flag days. Button. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button.
Our
Thousand start the
current
card. Date
time
return.
is
Thousand start the card.
11:30.
Improve. 100 miles. Flag days. Stop. Button. Flag days. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Action menu. Button. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Spare tire. Flag days. Stop. 50 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Check status. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. 50 miles.
Kailangan natin ng gas mga kaibigan.
100 miles. Thousand turn. Green light. Button. Check status. Button. Green light. Green light. Button. Thousand start the card. Date return. Date start the card. Improve. Speed limit. Check status. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. You can't play speed limit. 100 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Driving days. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Driving days. Stop. 100 miles. Button. Stop. Button. Driving days. Driving days. Button. Thousand play driving days. Improve. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Speed limit. Green light. Speed limit. Button. Green light. Button. Leave game. Button. No next default. Who has the table? Button. Speed limit. Button. Green light. Check status. Button. Green light. Green light. Button. Thousands of stars to card. Page's turn.
Siguraduhin natin yan maging 0 sa ngayong buong laro.
Check status. Button. 75 miles. Button.
Buong laro 0 yan.
75 miles. Button.
Hanggang sa ako manalo.
75 miles. Button. Thousands of stars to card. Page's turn. Race at the limit. Check status. Button. 100 miles. Button.
Tanggal mo yan.
100 miles. Speed limit. Button. 50 miles. Speed limit. Speed
Balik.
Button. Thousand play speed limit on page. Page's turn. Page starts to card. Improve. Flat tire. Flat tire. Button. Check status. Flat tire. Button. Flat tire. Button. Thousand play flat tire.
Yun.
Page's turn. Page starts to card. Improve. Flat tire. Check status. Button.
Paano ka
Check
patatakbo
status.
yan?
Button. 2,275/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Out of gas. Safety. Right away. Right away. Page. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Button. Check status. Flat tire. 50 miles. 100 miles. 50 miles. 50 miles. Button. Thousands of stars to card. Page's turn. Page lays there.
Siguraduhin natin
75
maging
miles.
0
Button.
siya.
75 miles. Button. Check status. Button. To turn. Check status. 75 miles. Flat tire. Button.
Para ako yung manalo.
Thousand play flat tire on page. Page's turn. Page lays there. 200 miles. 200 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. Check status. Button. 200 miles. 75 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Actions menu. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. 100 miles. Button. Stop. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. Check status. 200 miles. 75 miles.
Wala akong ano. Gaan.
75 miles. Button. Thousands of stars to card. Page's turn. Page lays at the limit. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Check status. To turn. Left the table. To turn. Check status. Button.
Bigyan nyo
100
ng
miles.
cash.
Check status. Button. Check status. Button. 2,275/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Out of gas. Safety. Right away. Right away. Page. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Safety. Extra 10. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Thousands of stars to card. Page's turn. Page's stars to card. 200 miles. 100 miles. Button.
Wait lang time out lang. Diyan lang kayo. Walang cut-cut to, walang cut-cut. At yun, nagbabalik ang ating pagbabalik para sa larong ito. Ano nga ba ang ginagawa natin dito?
100 miles. Green light. Check status. Button. Green light.
Our
Check status.
current
Check
time
status.
is
Button. 275/5,000 points. 250
11:35.
miles. Problems. Out of gas. Safety. Right away. Right away. Page. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Safety. Extra 10. Green light.
Okay. Kailangan natin ng gas.
Green light. Button.
Kasi wala
Start to
tayo
card.
nun.
Page's turn.
So magtatapon muna tayo.
Thousand turn. Check status. Green light. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Green light.
Ba naman natin sa
Check status. Button. Green light.
tatakbo, di ba? Mamaya na natin
Green light.
tapin
Button.
sila.
Thousand start to card. Page's turn. Page's start to card. Improve. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Action menu. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Button. 200 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Check status. To turn. Check status. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Thousand start to card. Page's turn. Page's start to card. Improve. Spare tire. Check status. Spare tire. Button.
Wala talaga.
Spare tire. Button. Thousand start to card. Page's turn. It's not your turn. Page's start to card. Improve. Green light. Check status. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Shall
Yung
use
mga
the
hindi
card.
kailangan din nandito.
Stage to start the card. Shall use turn. Punch your blue. Button. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button.
Napakaganda. Sigurado ng
Spare
panalo
tire.
natin
Button.
ito
Shall use
mga
the start the card.
bossing.
Stage to turn. 100 miles. Stage to start. 100 miles. Punch your blue. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Gasoline.
Yun.
Button. Shall use gasoline. Stage to turn. Stage to start the card. You blue. Stop. Shall use turn. Punch your blue. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. You can't play 200 miles.
Ayaw nga pala, hindi na pala pwede 200.
Shall use start the card. Stage to turn. Punch your blue. 100 miles. Button. Shall use turn. Stop. Button. Punch your blue. 100 miles.
Ito na pala
100
pwede.
miles. Button. You can't play 100 miles because you have a problem that prevents driving. Punch your blue. Stop.
Ano yun? Problema natin.
Button. Stop. Accident. Button. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Shall do. 2,275/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Flat tire. Safeties. Right away. Right away. H. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Safeties. Extra tank. Accident. Stop. Button. Punch your blue. 100 miles. 100 miles. Stop. 100 miles. 100 miles. Punch your blue. Stop. Accident. Check status. Return. Check status. Accident. Stop. Punch your blue. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Stop. Action menu. Stop. Button. Stop. 100 miles. 100 miles.
Oh,
Punch your blue. Stop.
bombo.
Accident. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. Accident. Button. Stop. Button.
Tinapon ko pa yung spare tire.
Punch your blue. Button.
Paplat pala tayo.
Button. Shall do. Punch your blue. You blue. 100 miles. Accident. Button. Stop. Button. 100 miles.
Ito sigurado na
100
tayo.
miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And now 350 miles.
Takbo na tayo.
Stage to start the car. Accident. Button. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. 100 miles. Check status. Button.
Ilan na, ilan na.
Check status. Button. Shall do. 2,275/5,000 points. 350 miles. Problems. None. Safety. Right away. Right away. Punch your blue. H. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Safety. Extra tank. Shall do. 2,275/5,000 points. 350 miles. Problems. None. Safety. Right away. Right away. Punch your blue. H. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. 100 miles.
0 mile.
100 miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And now 450 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Check status. Repairs. Button. 100 miles. Button. Accident. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And now 550 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You. Green light. Repairs. Button.
Siguraduhin natin
Stop. Button.
0 siya
100
sa
miles.
round na to.
Stop. Stop. Button. Action menu. Clears. Tab. Action menu. Stop. Stop. 100 miles. Stop. Accident. Stop. Button. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And now 650 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. 1. Accident. Repairs. Green light. Button. 100. Check status. Button. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And now 750 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Stop. Shall do. Turn. Check status. Stop. Button. Green light. Repairs. Button. Green light. Green light. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Speed limit. Speed limit. Button. Stop. Button. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Shall do. Play speed limit on page. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Green light. Shall do. Turn.
Pambihira na hatsing pa. Isa pa, isa pa, isa pa.
Check status. Green light. Button. Stop. Button. Green light. Check status.
Ano na
Button.
nangyari?
Check status. Button. Shall do. 2,275/5,000 points. 750 miles. Problems. None. Safety. Right away. Right away. Punch your blue. H. 3,275/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Flat tire. Speed limit. Safety. Extra tank. Green light. Stop. Button. Repairs. Accident. Button. Repairs. Button. Stop. Green light. Button.
Ang dami ng problema ng ano niya,
Shall do. Start the car.
sasakyan.
Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. 100 miles. Shall do. Turn. Check status.
Kaya
100 miles.
sigurado na
100 miles.
panalo natin
Shall do.
yung
100 miles.
pushing.
Shall do. 150 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Button. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Stop. Button. Repairs. Repairs. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue.
Bawi tayo ngayon.
Gasoline. Stop. Button. Gasoline. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Shall do. Play 50 miles. And is now 900 miles. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car.
100 na lang.
You blue. Mental limit. Check status. Mental limit. Button. Gasoline. Stop. Button. Gasoline. Mental limit. Button. Mental limit. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Stage to turn. To turn. Button. Stage play spare tire. You blue. Spare tire. Shall do. Turn. To turn. Who's at the table? Button. To turn. Check status. Spare tire. Button. Gasoline. Stop. Button. Accident. Button. Stop. Accident. Button. Accident. Shall do. Play accident on page. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. 200 miles. Shall do. Gasoline. Button. Spare tire. Button. Gasoline. Button. Spare tire. 200 miles. Button. Leave game. Button. Who's at the table? To turn. Button. Check status. 200 miles. Spare tire. Button. 200 miles.
100 na lang.
200 miles. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. Repairs. Shall do. Turn. Check status. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Stage to turn. Stage to start the car. You blue. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles.
Ayun, panalo na tayo.
100 kilometers. Shall do. Race complete.
Our
Ultimate
current
score.
time
1,500
is
points to race. 100 from distance travel. 400 from
11:40.
leadership. 300 from mistake. 500 from shutout. And 300 from free safety. They turn 100 points to race. 0 from distance travel. And 100 from one safety.
Score.
Shall do. 4,775 points. H. 3,375 points. New race begins. You blue. 200 miles. Shall do. Turn. Shall do. Turn. You blue. Turn menu. Heading to. Flat tire. Button.
Pero siya eh.
Repairs. Repairs. Button. Green light. 100 miles. Spare tire. 200 miles. Check status. Button. Return. Check status. Check status. Button. Shall do. 4,775/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Stop. Safety. None. 200 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Shall do. Play green light. Spare tire. Button. 200 miles. Button. Play stop. Shall do. You blue. Spare tire. Button. 200 miles. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Shall do. Play green light. Return. Button. You blue. 25 miles. 25 miles. Button. Shall do. Turn. Check status. Button.
Anong ginawa niya?
Check status. Button. Yahoo. 4,775/5,000 points. 0 miles. Problems. Speed limit. Safeties. None. Age. 3,025 miles. 200 miles. Spare tire. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Flat tire. Button. Actions menu. Flat tire. Repairs. Repairs. 100 miles. Spare tire. 200 miles. 25 miles. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. 25 miles. 25 miles. Button. Yahoo. Place 25 miles. Stage return. Stage place flat tire on Yahoo. Improve. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Button. Spare tire. 100 miles. Spare tire.
Karon
Button. Spare tire. Button.
bumabawi.
Stage return. Stage place flat tire on Yahoo. Improve. 75 miles. Yahoo. Return. Gasoline. 75 miles. Gasoline. Gasoline. Button. Yahoo. Place gasoline. Check status. Return. Button. Stage place puncture. 75 miles. Button. 200 miles. Stage place green light. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Check status. Button.
Babawi siya mga
75 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. 100 repairs. Button. Repairs. Flat tire. Actions menu. Layers. Tab. Actions menu. Flat tire. Button. Flat tire. Button.
hindi na pwede to sa kanya kasi ano, tatakbo na siya.
Stage play 100 miles. And now 100 miles. Repairs. Button. 200 miles. 75 miles. 75 miles. Green light. Check status. Button. Green light. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Place green light. Stage return. Return. Improve. 75 miles. 70. Check status. Button. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. You can't play 75 miles because the speed limit is active. 75 miles. 75 miles. 75 miles.
May limit yung ano takbo.
75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Stage play 100 miles. And now 400 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles. 75 miles.
Walang pang kanina
75 miles.
litaw ng litaw ngayon.
Stage play 50 miles. And now 450 miles. 100 miles. 50 miles. Button. 50 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 50 miles. And now 75 miles. Stage return. Stage play 100 miles. And now 5. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button. 100 miles. 50 miles. 50 miles.
Ayop na
Button.
yan.
Yahoo. Play 50 miles. And now 175 miles. Stage return. Stage play 50 miles. And now 600 miles. Check status. Button. Spare tire. Button. 100 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Stage play 50 miles. And now 650 miles. Spare tire. Spare tire. Button. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. Spare tire. Button. Spare tire. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Return. Button. Check status. Button. Stage play 75 miles. Spare tire. Button. 75 miles. Spare tire. Button. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 75 miles. 150 miles. Stage return. Stage play 50 miles. And now 700 miles. Check status. Button. Gasoline. Button. Spare tire. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Repairs. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Repairs. Actions menu. Repairs. Button.
Ano ba yan?
Repairs.
Walang
Button. Start the
ano.
car. Stage return. Stage play 75 miles. And now 750 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Spare tire. Gasoline. 75 miles. Button. Gasoline. 75 miles.
Walang pangtanggal ng limit.
No next default. Who's at the table? Button. Gasoline. Button.
Yan na.
75. Check status. Button. 75 miles.
Walang pangtanggal ng limit
75
eh.
miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Stage play 25 miles. And now 775 miles. Check status. Button. 50 miles. Button.
Bumabawi
50 miles.
talaga
Button.
puti.
Yahoo. Play 50 miles. And now 200 miles. Stage return. Stage play 100 miles. And now 875 miles. Check status. Green light. Button. Gasoline. Spare tire. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Repairs. Actions menu. Repairs. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start. 100 miles. Spare tire. Gasoline. Green light. Stage play for hand. Who's at the table? Leave game. Button. Yahoo. Turn. Who's at the table? Button. Green light. Button. 50 miles. Check status. Button. 50 miles. 50 miles. Button. Yahoo. Play 50 miles. And now 250 miles. Stage return. Stage play for Yahoo. Improve. Center limit. Check status. Center limit. Green light. Button. Center limit. Button. Center limit. Button. Return. Button. Check status. Button. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Turn. Spare tire. Button. 100 miles. Spare tire. Spare tire. Button. Green light. Speed limit. Button. Green light. Button. Stage to start the car. Green light. Button. Yahoo. Play green light. 200 miles. Speed limit. Button. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. You can't. Accident. 200 miles. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Yahoo. Play accident on stage. Stage return.
Ayop
Return.
pa.
Button. Stage to start the car. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles.
Namo.
200 miles. Speed limit. Button. Gasoline. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Button. Yahoo. Play speed. 75 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. Button. Stage to start the car. 200 miles. 75 miles. 100 miles. Button. Check status. 100 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 200 miles. Button. Repairs. 100 miles. Gasoline. Button. Station. 75 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. Check status. Return. Button. Check status. 75 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. 100 miles. Repairs. Actions menu. Repairs. 100 miles. Gasoline. 200 miles. 75 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. 75 miles. Stage to start the car. Stop. Check status. Stop. Button. 75 miles. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. 75 miles.
Yan, pare-pares tayo dapat.
75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return.
Pare-pares tayo talon.
Improve. Repairs. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Check status. Button. Who's at the table? Return. Check status. Button. Repairs. Button.
Ano daw ginawa niya?
Check status. Button. Yahoo. 4,775/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Stop. Safeties. None. Age. 3,375/5,000 points. 925 miles. Problems. Accident. Stop. Safety. Puncture proof. Extra hand. Repairs. Stop. Button. Repairs. Button. Check status. Repairs. Repairs. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Return. First lane repairs. 75 miles. Button. Improve. 75 miles. Check status.
Our
Button.
current
Return.
time
Button. Check
is
status. 75 miles.
11:45.
75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Stage to start the car. Improve. Check status. 75 miles. Button. 75 miles. Button. Yahoo. Start the car. Stage return. Return. Center limit. Button. Yahoo. Turn. Check status. Center limit. Stop. Button. 100 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. 200 miles. 100 miles. Stop. Button. Stop. Button. Yahoo. Play stop on H. Stage return. Stage to start the car. Improve. Spare tire. Yahoo. Turn. Spare tire. Button. Center limit. Spare tire. Button. Check status. Button. Spare tire. Center limit. 100 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. 100 miles. Repairs. Button. 100 miles. Gasoline. 200 miles. 100 miles. Center limit. Spare tire. Button. Check status. Spare tire. Check status. Spare tire. Spare tire. Button. You can't play spare tire. Cancel limit. Button. 200 miles. Gasoline. 100 miles. Repairs. Actions menu. Repairs. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Shall use the car. Repairs. Button. You group. Stop. Shall use turn. 100 miles. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Check status. Button. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Cancel limit. 100 miles. 200 miles. Gasoline. Button. Repairs. Button. Actions menu. Repairs. Gasoline. Button. 200 miles. 100 miles. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Check status. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Cancel limit. 100 miles. 200 miles. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles. Button. Shall use the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Repairs. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Repairs. Button. Stop. Button. Repairs. Leave game. Button. At the table. Who's turn. Button. Check status. Repairs. Stop. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Cancel limit. 200 miles. Button. Gasoline. 200 miles. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Stop. Repairs. Button. Check status. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Shall use the start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Driving ace. Shall use turn. Check status. Driving ace. Button.
Ayun.
Stop. Button. Spare tire. Cancel limit. 200 miles. Gasoline. Button. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Shall use the start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. 200 miles. Cancel limit. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Driving ace. 100 miles. Button. Check status. 100 miles. Driving ace. 100 miles. Button. 100 miles.
Tagal ng
Button.
green
Shall use the start
light.
the car. Station turn. You group. Allo gas. Check status. Button. Who's turn. Check status. Allo gas. Button.
Hindi na
Allo gas.
pwede sa
Button.
kanya
You can't
kasi
wait.
may
Shall use the start the car. Station
ito
turn.
na siya eh.
Who's turn. Button. Shall use turn. Check status. Green light. Button. Check status. Button.
Ano yun?
Check status. Button. Shall do. 4,775/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Stop. Allo gas. Safeties. None. Age. 3,375/5,000 points. 975 miles. Green light. Driving ace. Stop. Spare tire. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Cancel limit. Button. 2. Gasoline. Button. Gasoline. Button. Shall do. Gasoline. Cancel limit. Button. Shall do turn. Driving ace. Button. Green light. Button. Gasoline. Button. Green light. Gasoline. Gasoline. Button. You can't. Check status. Button. Check status. Button. Shall do. 4,775/5,000 points. 250 miles. Problems. Stop. Safeties. None. Age. 3,375/5,000 points. 925 miles. Problems. Stop. Safeties. Punch your roof. Extra tank. Gasoline. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Shall do. Green light. Driving ace. Button. Station start the car. You group. Accident. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Cancel limit. Button. 200 miles. Button. 200 miles. Button. Shall do. 200 miles. And is now 450 miles. Station turn. Station turn. Shall do. You group. Speed limit. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Driving ace. Gasoline. Accident. Button. Speed limit. Button. Check status. Button.
Okay,
Check status. Button. Shall do. 4,775/5,000 points. 450 miles. Problems. Accident. Stop. Safety. None. Speed limit. Accident. Gasoline. Driving ace. Button. Stop. Button. Driving ace. Button. Driving ace. Button. Shall do. Driving ace. You group. 75 miles. Accident. Speed limit. 75 miles. Check status. 75 miles. Speed limit. Accident. Gasoline. Accident. Button. Speed limit. Button. Accident. Button. Speed limit. Button. Accident. Button. Accident. Button. Shall do. Accident. Station. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Right away. Shall do turn. 75 miles. Speed limit. Button. Gasoline. Speed limit. 75 miles. Right away. Button. Right away. Button. Shall do. Right away. You group. Speed. Check status. Speed limit. Button. 75 miles. Button.
Yan, panalo na tayo dito. Ba't sigurado na?
175 miles. Station turn. 200 miles. Speed limit. 200 miles. Button. 200 miles. Button. Shall do. 200 miles. And is now 725 miles. Station turn. Station stop. Check status. Spare tire. Button. Speed limit. Speed limit. Gasoline. Stop. Spare tire. Button. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Cancel limit. Actions menu. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Cancel limit. Cancel limit. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Cancel limit. Shall do turn. Stop. Button. Gasoline. Speed limit. Speed limit. Spare tire. Cancel limit. Check status. Button. Cancel limit. Spare tire. Cancel limit.
Kanina hindi nagpapakita, di ba?
Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station
Ayun,
turn.
pakita
Start the
na,
car.
pakita.
Start time shuffle. Check status. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Gasoline. Check status. Gasoline. Spare tire. Speed limit. Speed limit. Gasoline. Button. Stop. Spare tire. Button. Actions menu. Spare tire. Stop. Button. Gasoline. Speed limit. Gasoline. Gasoline. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Speed limit. Button. Station start the car. Repairs. Button. Check. Who's turn. Button. Check status. Repairs. Button. Repairs. Button. Shall do. Start the car.
Tapon na
Station
natin
turn.
yan.
Station start the car. Check status. 100 miles. Button. Gasoline. Button. 100 miles. 100 miles. Button. Shall do. 100 miles. And is now 875 miles. Station turn. Station start the car. Check status. Green light. Button. Green light. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You do. Cancel limit. Shall do turn. Check status. Cancel limit. Cancel limit. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You do. 50 miles. Check status. 50 miles. 50 miles. Button. Shall do. 50 miles. And is now 875 miles. Station turn. Station start the car. You do. 20. Check status. 25 miles. 25 miles. Button. Shall do. 75 miles. Station turn. Station start the car. Check status. 75 miles. Button. Gasoline. Button. Spare tire. Speed limit. Speed limit. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Actions menu. Button. Spare tire. Stop. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Spare tire. Button. Gasoline. Spare tire. Button. Spare tire. Button. Shall do. Start the car. 75 miles. Station start the car. 75.
Our
Check
current
status.
time
Turn.
is
Button. Check status. 75 miles.
11:50.
Button. 75 miles. Gasoline. Button. 75 miles. 75 miles. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Gasoline. Gasoline. Button. 75 miles. Gasoline. Button. Gasoline. Button. Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. Station start the car. You group. Check status. Green light. Button.
Isa na lang.
Green light. Button. Shall do. Start the car.
100.
Station
Kailangan
turn.
natin ng 100.
Start the car. You group. Gasoline. Shall do. Turn. Check status. Gasoline. Button.
Panalo na tayo dito.
Gasoline.
Mga
Button.
bossing.
Shall do. Start the car. Station turn. You turn. You group. Green light. Green light. Check status. Button. Green light. Button.
At siyempre,
Green light. Button. Challenge the start bar.
Umabot
Stage turn.
din ng ilang
Start bar.
oras to.
Check status. Button. Green light. Button.
So, ngayon tatapusin na natin.
Green light. Button. Challenge the start bar. Stage turn. Take away flash value. Check status. Button. Cancel limit. 75 miles.
Pinlat tayo
Speed limit.
mga
Speed
kaibigan.
limit. Stop. Button. Spare tire. Button. Spare tire. Button. Challenge limit. Speed limit. Button. Speed limit. Gasoline. Button. 75 miles. Cancel limit. Button. Cancel limit. Button. Check status. Button. Cancel limit. Cancel limit. Button. Challenge the start bar. Stage turn. Return. Repairs. Button. Improve. Check status. Repairs. Button.
Kailangan natin ng 100
Stage turn.
miles.
Start bar. Improve. 100 miles. Check status. 100 miles.
Ito, panalo na tayo mga kaibigan.
100 miles. Recent feet. Calculated scores. 1,600 points race. 1,000 from distance travel. 400 from completed trip. 200 from two safeties. Base turn 1,125 points race. 925 from distance travel. 200 from two safeties. Total scores. Xiaozu 6,375 points. Age 4,500 points. Xiaozu wins the game. Final score 6,375 points.
Ayun, narinig nyo. Winner of the game, Josu.
1. Xiaozu 2. Age. Leave game. No next default. Clear web. Web view. Xiaozu wins the game. Final score. Game over. Heading 2. Final score 6,375 points. Xiaozu wins the game. Final score 6,375 points.
Ayan, naka 5,000 lang dapat yun. Nalampasan ko pa yung 5,000 mo, boy.
Game over. Final score 6,375 points.
6,375.
Game over. Final score 6,375 points.
Yun,
Game over.
salamat
Heading
sa mga nanood. At
Selected. Menu. Tab.
ayun,
Chat. Tab.
hanggang sa ibang laro ulit. Sa ibang laro ulit, ano mga kaibigan, mga kapatid, mga YouTube, kung ano-ano pa man, at sa mga nanood, ayan, thank you, sa mga nakikinig, sa mga nakinig, kung nakarating ka sa dulo na to, kaya, dulo ng laro na to hanggang sa pagtatapos, ayan, ingat kayo lahat, peace out.